Go.
Good afternoon. My name is John McIsaac. I'm the owner and president for ASAP Environmental. We do testing for lead paint and mold, and by the end of this month we should be also doing testing for asbestos. Based out of Dorchester. We've been doing lead paint since 1993. I've actually been doing inspections since 1991. And we've been doing mold for about a dozen years now, and again we're starting up with asbestos very soon. So what we're here today to give you is information primarily about lead paint. I'll answer any other questions you have regarding mold or asbestos, and if I don't have the answers, I'll get to the people in my company that will be doing that particular service. I have the broad strokes on both of them. I've taken the courses and all that, but I'm not going to be licensed in that. I just wanted to see what I was getting myself into, you know. So, but today we're going to give you some information regarding lead paint laws here in Massachusetts. If you're not familiar with the fact that the laws changed in December of the 17, actually, the laws changed dramatically, so we'll definitely touch base on that. But maybe the first thing I'm going to do is we have some product back there, Effie's Homemade. That's actually my sister's company out of Hyde Park. Her husband actually works for me. And I told her she can't sell the company until I sell mine because I don't want to have to train another person. But she's been doing that for almost 10 years now. And in fact, today she's in a test kitchen. They're coming out with a whole new product line by the end of this year. So they're doing their first bake of it today. But the company is named after my mother. And she brought the original product down, which is the oat cakes. And from Nova Scotia, when we were children, we were eating these all the time. We thought everybody else ate like that, but we found out a few years ago that was not necessarily the case. So please feel free. We have two of the products here today, the oat cakes and the coconut cakes, and see what you think about them. All right, so homeowner package we're going to have in here. This is actually our realtor package, and all part of this will have some information on mold. And then on the other side here, we have information about lead paint. So this is our brochure. It'll fold out, and this will actually bring the process updating this to reflect that we're doing the asbestos. So that gives you a general idea of the technology that we're using and things like that. We have some information here today on the Renovate Right program. And this is a federal law that came out in 2010 regarding people who are working on older homes, and meaning older homes, properties built prior to 1978. And people are working for a fee on that property, whether the contractor, the owner, management company, all of those people are supposed to be certified to do that work. So we'll get you some information on that. Mentioned the changes in the lead laws. We have a piece of information here on that. We certainly will touch base about that. This is actually a homeowner package. It has information on the lead laws, funding that's available for de-leading projects, tax credits, work that the owner could do. So pretty much everything you want to know about lead and we're afraid to ask. We also have a copy of a report here with compliance letters, and we'll utilize that here too. And everybody knows about this piece. This is the property transfer notification. We're all familiar with that. And we also have some information about the testing we do for that federal law called Restoration, Renovation, and Painting Law. Okay, so broad strokes. The current lead law requires that and this law has been in place since 1988, requires that any property built prior to 1978 with a child under the age of 6, whether it's owner occupied or tenant occupied, be in compliance with the lead law. And I'm going to repeat that again, whether it's owner occupied or tenant occupied, whether it's a single family home, multi-family home, condo, condex, townhouse, duplex. If there's a child under the age of 6, they're supposed to have a letter of compliance if it's built prior to 1978. Now, compliance doesn't mean the property has to be lead free. You could have many surfaces on the property that are positive for lead paint and still be in compliance with the law. What we wanted to do is make sure there are no lead hazards at that property. And just because a surface is positive for lead paint does not make it a hazard. It can be, but in most circumstances, as long as the paint is in good condition on those surfaces, it would be in compliance with the law. And that was the big shift in the lead law back in 2017, that the state lowered the de-leading standard significantly. Prior to that, we had the most stringent standard for testing and abatement standards in the country. And what the Baker administration did when they came in, they were looking at all the laws in Massachusetts that had a corresponding federal law. And they were going to go with the least stringent standard. And what we did to help that happen was, first of all, we initiated the conversation with the Massachusetts regulators 8 years prior to this law coming into play. We being traded the Lead and Environmental Hazards Association, with local chapter here in Massachusetts, which I'm the president of. We reached out to the state and said maybe we might want to consider taking a look at our laws, and eventually somebody did, and we came up with this plan to make it still safe for the people living in the property, but lower the cost potentially significantly on de-leading jobs. In fact, we found that on most jobs, the cost has gone down anywhere from 50 to 90% less expensive than what they were prior to 2017. So, big shift in the law, still making it safe for the people living there, lowering the cost of the people that actually have to do the work to bring it in compliance. So that's the good news. But the law in the other aspects has not changed. It still requires if it's a child under the age of 6 living in the property and it's built prior to 78, it still be in compliance. You would have to have a letter of compliance to show that. Without that letter of compliance, it's meaningless. And so we want to make sure that you're getting the information today that's going to apply to you when and if you're selling a property of that era. And if you find that this lead paint may potentially be an issue for the person that's purchasing that property, that you have the information to give to them that was actually relevant to that sale. Yes, please.
So what if you have a client who has lost the letter of compliance, but it is listed on the website,
Right.
That it is in fact de-leaded or work has been done to it? Is that sufficient enough? Like how does, because I had a situation like this where, you know, my client actually couldn't find it.
Okay. And that's not unusual.
Can I add to that? I had a situation exactly the same.
It's probably the same client.
And when I contacted the department of the downtown, whoever it was,
Child Lead Poisoning Prevention Program.
they didn't have the record of it.
Oh my gosh.
And that record is up, but that, see, as inspectors, we're required to send a cover sheet for any report that we do, which would be this here, when we do the initial inspection, and any compliance that are into the state, which goes in the database and onto their website. So that database is only as good as the information that people are sending in.
Right.
And not everyone was as diligent about doing that as they should have been. And that's one of the reasons there's been over a 90% turnover in this industry since the law came into play in '88. So if there's your case here, you see something on the state website but there's no paper, then the first thing to do is check and see if that company is still in business. It'll have the name of the inspector on there,
Yeah.
and there's
Which
a good
is, like,
chance that...
barely legible sometimes.
Oh, that's right, exactly.
Because they're
But
so old, I mean, they really, some letters go back, or some,
there's letters that go back into the 70s. I mentioned there were laws that were in place before '88. They were typically only came into play when there was a poisoned child. So there has been some version of a lead law here in Massachusetts since the early 70s. The one we're dealing with today started in '88 and has been amended 3 times, with the last one being the most significant change. So in your situation, if you could find, you get the name of the inspector and find out that inspector's still in business, then you can find that out by going to the Child Lead Poison Prevention Program and the CLIP website, which is on here on the homeowner package, is on your front page, about the 4th paragraph down. You can call that into them, or you could just go onto their website and find out if that company that inspector is still in business. And if he is, he or she, then you could reach out to them and say, we have this report that we need to get, and the compliance that it goes with that report. Because if you're just getting the compliance letter, that's potentially meaningless in that because as I mentioned earlier, a property doesn't have to be lead-free to be in compliance. Without the report that goes with this compliance letter, this report here, showing what surfaces were positive for lead when the initial inspection was done, and then if there was work done to bring it into compliance, what the methods were chosen to bring those surfaces into compliance. Without having that information, you have no idea whether that property is still in compliance today. Many times, I just talked to a woman this morning, they had a report from 2002, and we actually did it. We did get a report, they got a de-leading done in 2002. The woman is trying to sell her property to her son. And she wanted to make sure that she had the right paperwork. And I told her, I assured her that she did. I said, now, this is going back 18 years, 19 years, whatever, maybe a little more than, was it 2002? So about 18 years, I guess. And so I said, that we want to go in there and verify what's there today versus what was there back when we issued that letter in 2002. So we're going out there tomorrow and do what's called a post-compliance assessment determination. That's utilizing the existing report, doing a visual on that property, in this case here also the common areas that go with that property, and verifying what the condition of the lead paint that was left there after compliance was issued. And if everything would be still in compliance, then we would get them what's called a letter of maintained compliance, which is an addendum to the original letter of compliance. We do this post-compliance assessment and then issue them a new letter. It's on here somewhere. Let me see.
In a worst case scenario, you could have somebody come back out and retest the property, I take it, to have a
That's
new
correct.
thing. And what was that roughly cost, like say for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath?
Well, if we're coming in and doing this thing, with this here, since I have pictures, because we have the paper, because we scan all of it, we have all the paperwork. We've actually done over 30,000 of these inspections, done more than anybody else in the state. So we have that information. If a client called us up and all they had was the compliance letter, we said, well, we have the report. And we know that in this case here, she has it too, but we have it also.
Okay.
We're gonna go out there for $200, do a visual assessment on the property, verifying all the surfaces that were in compliance previously are still in compliance today. And if it is, issue a letter of maintain, in this case, this was one which is called restore compliance. They're similar, but if we went out there and everything was good, then we get a call a letter of maintained compliance, which is an addendum to the original letter of compliance. And that removes them from liability to lead law, allowing children there under the age of 6. And when their son moves in, he's gonna have a property that at least for the day that compliance letter was issued, everything was good. Now, these compliance letters are potentially only as good as the day that they're issued because still having lead paint on the property, it's required that the owners maintain those surfaces in order to stay in compliance. And most people see that the fact that they got a letter of full de-leading compliance, and they're thinking, and I would think this way too, that full de-leading means lead-free. It's very misleading.
That is misleading, because I
So-
always thought that as well.
That's right, most people do, and if I was a civilian, I would think that also. And one of the things that did happen as a result of sitting down with the state while we were trying to amend the laws, one of the things that I personally brought up, and I wasn't the only one thinking about this, but I was the one with the big mouth who brought it up and had the hand up, is that one of the things you may want to consider is changing the terminology.
Yeah.
Now, they said, we would love to do that, but in order to do that, that would have to be done by the legislature. So what they did do was let people know when we get their compliance letter that your house is not lead-free. Now this, before that information was given, but it was in like this, and nobody really looked at it, because most people are saying, full de-leading compliance, I'm good. They've gone through an experience they never wanted to go through in the first place. It cost them a lot of money, a lot of headaches, or whatever it happens to be. They were glad to get rid of us. They got to see this letter and they think this is good forever. Well, most people didn't know that you had to maintain compliance because they didn't read it. And we actually emphasize that. We send them a letter when we email them the reports in the compliance letter that they have to maintain the surfaces. But a lot of people just put it away, done deal, they don't have to worry about it. Well, it's not a done deal. So the state came up with this in big letters. Your house is not lead-free. There's something that's going to be on the, when we send this compliance letter out now, the front page is going to be this. And it'll get people's attention. And one of the things that we do when we go in and do our testing, if we find there are lead hazards at the property, we're going to talk to the clients about, you know, what the short-term, well, first of all, we're going to ask them what the short-term and long-term plans are on the property. If they're going short-term, there may be some options to bring that property in compliance that they may want to consider versus if they were going long-term, they may want to consider something else. So on most surfaces that are positive for lead paint, that if it's a hazard, or if it's not a hazard, they have between 4 and 6 options to bring that surface into compliance. Some options more expensive than others, some have better long-term methods than others, some might be more appropriate for that property than others. So depending upon what the client's needs are, we try to give them some information that, first of all, that there's a good chance that your property will still have lead paint on it no matter what you do after compliance is issued. And if you want to be involved with that property, meaning, maybe go and check on it from time to time and see what the condition of the paint is, then maybe you may want to consider X option versus Y option. If, say, you did replacement on the surface, you don't have to worry about it, it's a done deal. Now, that surface, the minimum standard may be just that the existing paint on it that's positive for lead just needs to be intact. So if they just go with that option, which is cheaper than replacing, they're required to maintain that. So we're talking to them up front, letting them know what the different options are. When they're talking to the de-leading contractors and making their decision to bring that property into compliance, they should pick the brain of the contractors and talk about those different options and what the costs are for those options and what the long-term and short-term benefits are of the different methods. So at the end of the day, when we issue a letter of compliance, they're going to have some information up front that they've been involved with. They made the decision on how to bring that property into compliance. They know if there's still going to be lead paint there, they're going to have to maintain it. We give them information up front on how to go about and do that and who can do that, which potentially they could do themselves without being trained. And that way they know, and they can't say, well, I didn't know. Now they know that, okay, I've got a letter of compliance. Full de-leading doesn't necessarily mean the property's lead-free. It could be, but more often than not, it's not the case. I mean, if you had to make Jamaica plain lead-free, you had to burn down the entire town. So we're not quite ready to do that yet. What we're trying to do in most circumstances, people are trying to make it, they're trying to make it lead-safe so they can get somebody living in the unit with a child under the age of 6 and be removed from liability. Also knowing the fact that if there is still lead paint there, then they're going to be required to maintain the surface of still lead paint in order technically to stay in compliance. And why that's important is a number of reasons, but the primary one is that in Massachusetts, up to the age of 3, or depending on where they live, they being the children under 6, up to the age of 4, that they're required when they go in for their yearly physical to have blood drawn. And they're looking for lead in the blood. And if, God forbid, a child comes up with poisoned, then they're not dealing with the company like mine, they're dealing with the local Board of Health and or the State Department of Health. And there's mandates, it has to be done by a certain time, or there's potential litigation that's involved. So, most people want to avoid litigation as much as possible. I know I do. That's one of the reasons I carry $2 million worth of insurance, to make sure that, if it ever does come up, that we're all set, which we've only had to use one time in over 30,000 inspections that we've done. But that's the whole thing. If this is all about liability, making places safe for children, and making sure that, that the people can get what they want at the end of the day, they make that decision, and then they move forward.
Question, is there a place where you can find statistics about kids and whether they have lead poisoning?
No.
So is it all...
You wouldn't be able to find out as a civilian. That is confidential information. In fact, we have a state website we might talk about with the information on about inspections and compliance letters. When there's a poisoned child, it doesn't become public record. That goes with the local Board of Health. So if it happened in Boston, 1010 Mass Ave would have that record, but you would not be able to access that information. The owner of the property, whether it's the owner when the inspection was done and compliance letter issued, or any owners moving forward, could access that information.
So even you don't have that information?
No.
Do you know offhand if the trajectory has been trending downwards in terms of childhood poisoning or level or?
Well, that's actually one of the other things that happened as a part of the change in this lead law is that the state changed what they considered was poisoned. And it was ironic that we had the most stringent lead law in the country regarding inspections and abatement, but the least stringent regarded poisoned children.
The amount. Yeah.
And so the rest of the country had been at what called 10 micrograms per deciliter was considered poison. In Massachusetts, it was 25. And Massachusetts would brag all the time about how, and I know that from being at conferences and stuff like that, that they had talked about how well we were doing here with lowering the amount of children that were poisoned. And at some level, we were doing something good because we've done more inspections percentage-wise than anybody in the state in the country by far. But at the same time, our level was at 25. And in other states, anything from 10 and up would have been considered poisoned. In Massachusetts, 10 to 24 was considered an elevated level. So the child wasn't poisoned and didn't have to go through a potential protocol for chelation and things like that. The standard for the people bringing the property into compliance as far as who was going to oversee that and all that changed as a result of that. But what happened with the change in the law is that they not only changed the de-leading standards, they lowered the standard for, I mentioned, made it more, I'm sorry, they brought the number down to 10,